Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this tutorial, I'm going to talk about how to do some sequencing. Now that we have learned about variables and if statements, and we've also learned about moving sprites with the counter pattern and the draw loop, we're going to head into an animation project. And I find that a lot of times my students want to do things like one thing happens and then another thing happens, like the car drives down the road and then stops or it crashes, or the rocket fires into the sky and goes up and then explodes and then a message appears, or the spaceship moves across the screen and stops and fires a laser, or what have you. Where one thing happens after another thing, and this is how I do it. I'm going to show you guys how I do that, and with a fireworks example. We were making some animated greeting cards last term, and a bunch of my students wanted to do fireworks. So this is one that I already have started, and I've got only one animation here, which was just a firework that I pulled off of the internet. Without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to identify two variables, and these are going to be Booleans. They're going to be one set to true and one set to false. The first is sequence 1, and we're going to set that to true, and the next one is sequence 2, and we'll set that to false. Then I'm going to create a sprite for my firework. I'm going to scale that down. I'm going to set the scale small at first, at 10%. So it's a little tiny firework, and then we're going to go into the draw loop. I think I'll switch over to blocks here because that's easier for some folks to understand or to just visualize. So I'm going to pull a draw loop in here. I'm going to set my background to black. So then I'm going to pull in two if statements. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have two different conditionals, and there's going to be some code inside of these if statements. And what we're going to do is make our conditional such that we can turn on the code inside of one of the if statements. And then when that's done, it will turn itself off and it will turn on the next if statement and run the code in that. So in that way, the statements inside the first conditional fire off and then they stop. And then statements in the second conditional start. So it creates a sequence where first you go through the first if statement and then you go through the second one. And we can do that with any number of if statements. So we can string together a sequence of any number of actions. So we want to enter the first if statement immediately. That's going to be the first thing that starts. And notice that we have a variable here, sequence 1, that's set to true already. So we can put in a conditional here that says, if sequence 1 is true, then do what's inside of this if statement. So that's going to happen immediately because sequence 1 starts being true. And let's take a look at this hold on. I'm going to put a draw sprites in here. Our second one is going to be if sequence 2 is true. Okay, so I changed this to 315 and put in the conditionals and draw sprites here so we can see where my little tiny firework starts. So it's going to start down here and be launched upward. So it's going to move straight up. And then when it gets to a certain point up here, it's going to explode. So again, when the program runs, it goes immediately into the first if statements because sequence 1 is true. And then we're going to use a counter pattern in order to move that sprite up the screen. So we're going to decrease its Y value. So we want to grab one of these guys and say firework 1 equals firework 1. Actually, that's going to be firework1.y because we want its Y value. We want to change its Y value or update its Y value with the counter pattern. Firework1.y, we're going to say minus 12. It's going to move upward fairly quickly. Let's see how that works. There it goes. And right now, it runs right off the top of the screen. We want to make it so when it gets to a certain point up here, it stops moving, and we're going to hold it steady, and then we're going to increase its scale so it expands and looks like it's blowing up. So we want to, let's move it up to about y of about 60. If it goes less than 60, we want to stop sequence 1. We want to make this Boolean evaluate to false. So we need to put another conditional in here that's going to stop it. So I'm going to pull another if statement in here, and we're going to say if firework.y is less than 60, then we're going to make this sequence 1 variable false. So that becomes false. Now then on the next pass through the draw loop, sequence 1 is now false, so it's not going to go into this if statement anymore. It's going to skip it and go to the second if statement. So it should stop moving up the screen because we're stopping the counter pattern. Let's see if that works. Yes, we've stopped it. Okay, now we want to go into the next sequence. So we need to set sequence 2 to true, and we do that in this nested if statement as well. So we're going to pull in another one of these and say set sequence 2 to true. So at the same time we turn off sequence 1, we turn on sequence 2. And in sequence 2, we're going to use the counter pattern to increase the scale of the firework. So it looks like it's expanding and exploding. So we're going to say, oops, I don't want that one. Firework 1.scale equals firework 1.scale plus 0.01. Not 0.01, 0.1. So that should expand it. Let's see what happens. There it goes. And it keeps going. We want that to stop at some point and then disappear. Would make it look a little more realistic, I think. So the next part is going to be turning off sequence 2. So we're going to pull in another if statement. We're going to do another nested if statement here. And we want to say that if the scale gets to a certain point, turn off sequence 2, or rather make sequence 2 variable false. So that's going to look like if firework 1.scale is greater than about 2, then the firework's done, it's going to disappear, and we're going to use sprite.visible equals false for that. So it will disappear. If we had another sequence after this, then we would also do what we did up here in the first one. We would say sequence 2 now equals false, and sequence 3 equals true. So we would turn off sequence 2 and turn on sequence 3. This is where I'm going to end this one, so we don't need to add those statements. And I think that's about it. And there it is. One more time. Easy fireworks. I've got a... Oh, this should be... There we go. That's all there is to it. So again, we create any number of sequence variables, and in our draw loop, we use if statements and nested if statements to turn on sequences of code and turn off others. And this can be used to do just about anything where you want one thing to happen after another. Super useful. I use it quite a bit in GameLab, and it will come into play as we move forward. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.